The girl with paint-stained fingers stood alone at the edge of Jefferson, Texas, watching colors in the sky that nobody else seemed to see. And that was the moment Coleman Vance first noticed her getting pelted with rotten vegetables from the mercantile crowd. It was the spring of 1878, and Jefferson was a town that prided itself on conformity and practical thinking. Coleman had ridden in 3 days prior, dusty and tired from driving cattle up from the southern ranges, looking for work that didn't involve sleeping under stars or eating beans from a tin can every night. He found employment at the Harrison Ranch just outside town, a sprawling operation that needed experienced hands who could break horses and mend fences without complaint. But this particular Saturday afternoon, Coleman had come into town for supplies and a hot meal, and instead found himself witnessing something that made his chest tighten with an unfamiliar anger. The young woman stood perfectly still as a tomato exploded against her shoulder, staining the simple blue dress she wore. Her light brown hair had come loose from its bun, wisps of it framing a face that remained eerily calm despite the harassment. "Witch!" someone called from the crowd. "Seeing things that are not there, talking nonsense about colors dancing." "My daughter says you told her the wind has ribbons," another woman shouted, her face twisted with contempt. Filling children's heads with lies and fantasies. Coleman pushed through the gathering crowd, his tall frame and broad shoulders making people step aside whether they wanted to or not. He was 24 years old, had been working cattle and horses since he was barely tall enough to reach a stirrup, and he had seen enough cruelty in his life to recognize it instantly. This was cruelty, plain and simple, dressed up as righteous concern. "That is enough," he said, his voice carrying across the street with the kind of authority that came from years of commanding spooked cattle and stubborn ranch hands. The young woman's eyes found his for the first time. They were an unusual shade of hazel, shifting between green and gold depending on how the light caught them, and in that moment Coleman saw something in them that took his breath away. It was not fear, though she had every right to be afraid. It was not shame, though the crowd clearly wanted her to feel it. It was wonder, as if even now, even standing there covered in thrown food and surrounded by hatred, she was seeing something beautiful that he could not. "This is not your concern, Cowboy," said Martha Pendleton, the banker's wife and self-appointed moral guardian of Jefferson. "This girl spreads confusion and inappropriate ideas. She needs to learn her place." "Her place," Coleman repeated slowly, his jaw tightening. "And where exactly is that, madam? Because from where I am standing, it looks like her place is being a young woman minding her own business while grown adults act like children." A few people in the crowd had the decency to look ashamed. Others glared at Coleman with the kind of resentment reserved for outsiders who dared challenge the established order. Martha Pendleton's face turned an impressive shade of red. "You have been in town 3 days, Mr. Vance. You do not understand the situation." "Then maybe someone should explain it to me," Coleman said. "But first, this crowd needs to disperse. Now." There was something in his tone that brooked no argument. It was the same voice he used with a 1,000-pound bull that was considering charging. Most of the crowd began to shuffle away, mumbling to themselves. Martha Pendleton gave him a look that could have curdled milk before turning on her heel and marching back toward the mercantile. When the street had finally cleared, Coleman turned his full attention to the young woman. Up close, he could see that she was trembling slightly, though her face still held that same expression of strange calm. She was probably around 21 or 22, he guessed, with delicate features and hands that were indeed stained with what looked like paint or dye in various colors. "Are you all right, miss?" he asked, softening his voice considerably. She blinked, as if coming back from somewhere far away. "Yes," she said quietly. "Yes, I am fine. Thank you for your intervention, though it was not necessary." "Looked pretty necessary to me," Coleman said. "That is not the first time something like this has happened, is it?" A small, sad smile crossed her face. "No. It is the third time this month, but it does not matter. They cannot take away what I see, no matter how many vegetables they throw." Coleman found himself intensely curious. What is it you see exactly? She studied him for a long moment, those shifting hazel eyes searching his face for something. Whatever she found there must have satisfied her, because she said, "Everything. I see everything the way it really is. Colors have sounds, numbers have personalities. The wind carries ribbons of light that dance and swirl. Music creates shapes in the air that I could paint if I had enough canvas and time." "That sounds beautiful," Coleman said, and he meant it. Her eyes widened slightly, and he realized with a start that perhaps no one had ever responded to her descriptions that way before. "You do not think I am mad? I think you see the world different than most folks," Coleman said carefully. "That does not make you mad. That makes you rare." She smiled then, a real smile that transformed her entire face. "My name is Helena Emerson. I live with my aunt on the edge of town. She tolerates my strangeness, though she wishes I would learn to keep quiet about it." "Coleman Vance," he replied, touching the brim of his hat. "Recently employed at the Harrison Ranch. And I have to say, Miss Emerson, I would very much like to hear more about what you see, if you would be willing to tell me." Helena looked at him with such surprise and cautious hope that Coleman felt something shift in his chest. It was not love, not yet, but it was the beginning of something that would grow into love with time and care and understanding. "I would like that," she said softly. "I would like that very much." They walked together toward the edge of town, away from the watchful eyes and judgmental stares. Coleman carried the basket she had dropped, now empty of whatever vegetables she had intended to buy before the harassment began. As they walked, Helena began to talk, hesitantly at first and then with growing confidence. "When I was a child, I thought everyone saw the world the way I did," she explained. "I would tell my mother about the purple sound of the church bells, or how the number 7 was irritable and standoffish while the number 3 was warm and friendly. She would smile and pat my head, thinking I was being imaginative. But as I grew older and continued to speak this way, people began to worry. They thought I was ill, or touched in the head, or possessed." "But you are none of those things," Coleman said. "No, I have read about others like me in medical journals my aunt obtained from a doctor in New Orleans. There are people whose senses overlap in unusual ways. We see sounds, hear colors, taste shapes. It is not madness or possession. It is simply a different way of experiencing the world." Coleman listened, fascinated. They had reached a small house at the very edge of Jefferson, painted a cheerful yellow with white trim. Behind it stretched open fields that eventually gave way to pine forests. Helena gestured toward a small structure that might once have been a shed or workshop. "This is where I paint," she said. "Would you like to see?" He followed her into the workshop, and what he saw there took his breath away. The walls were covered with canvases, and each one was a riot of color and movement. There were landscapes that seemed to pulse with life, portraits where the subjects were surrounded by halos of light and color, abstract pieces that somehow conveyed emotion more clearly than any realistic painting could. "This is what music looks like to me," Helena said, pointing to a swirling mass of blues and golds and deep purples. "This was a hymn I heard in church. And this," she moved to another canvas, "this is what anger sounds like, and this is joy." Coleman moved from painting to painting, his weathered cowboy hands clasped behind his back, as if afraid he might accidentally touch something and break the spell. "Miss Emerson," he said finally, "these are the most incredible things I have ever seen." She laughed, a sound like bells, and Coleman realized he wanted to hear that laugh again and again. "You really think so? Everyone else says they are disturbing or confusing or wrong." "They are not wrong," Coleman said firmly. "They are true. Maybe more true than anything else because they come from your honest experience of the world." Helena sat down on a paint-splattered stool, and some of the tension seemed to drain from her shoulders. "Why did you help me today?" "Mr. Vance, you do not know me. You owe me nothing." Coleman considered the question seriously. I suppose I have never liked seeing someone hurt for being different, and maybe I am curious. You see the world in a way I cannot imagine. That seems like something worth understanding, not something worth mocking. Would you? Helena hesitated, then continued in a rush. Would you like me to try to show you? Not just tell you, but help you understand what it is like. Yes, Coleman said without hesitation. Yes, I would like that very much. That was how their unusual courtship began. Over the following weeks, Coleman would finish his work at the Harrison Ranch and ride into town to spend time with Helena. She would take him on walks through Jefferson and the surrounding countryside, describing everything she experienced in painstaking detail. She taught him to close his eyes and really listen to the world around him, to pay attention to the subtle differences in sounds and textures and temperatures. The creek has a silvery green sound, she told him one afternoon as they sat beside the water. Like wind chimes made of glass, and when the water moves faster over those rocks, it shifts to a brighter shade, almost yellow-green. Coleman closed his eyes and listened. He could not hear colors, could not see sounds, but he could hear the water in a way he never had before. He could pick out the different notes it made, the way the sound changed as the current shifted and swirled. I hear it, he said, opening his eyes to find Helena watching him with delight. Not the colors, but I hear the music in it. I never paid attention before. Most people do not, Helena said. They move through the world without really experiencing it. But you are trying, Coleman. You are really trying to understand. As spring turned to summer, Coleman found himself falling in love. It happened gradually, in small moments. The way Helena's face lit up when she found a perfect wildflower to study. The concentration in her expression as she mixed paints, trying to capture some ephemeral quality she had experienced. The courage it took for her to keep being herself in a town that wanted her to be smaller, quieter, more normal. For her part, Helena found herself drawn to Coleman's steadiness, his quiet strength, and his genuine curiosity about her experiences. He never made her feel strange or wrong. He asked thoughtful questions and listened carefully to her answers. He defended her when others made cruel comments, but he also respected her ability to defend herself. One particularly warm July evening, they sat together on the porch of Helena's aunt's house, watching the sun set over the fields. The sky was ablaze with orange and pink and deep purple, and Coleman could almost imagine he saw what Helena described, the way the colors sang and danced, the way they created harmonies in the air. I have been thinking, Coleman said carefully, about something you said when we first met, about how people cannot take away what you see, no matter what they do. Yes, Helena said, turning to look at him. The setting sun caught her hair and turned it to burnished gold. I think you are one of the bravest people I have ever met, Coleman continued. You refuse to make yourself smaller or quieter to make other people comfortable. You insist on being fully yourself, even when it costs you. Helena's eyes grew bright, and Coleman realized she was fighting tears. It is hard sometimes. I wish I could just be normal. I wish I could see the world the way everyone else does, so they would stop looking at me like I am broken. You are not broken, Coleman said fiercely. He reached over and took her paint-stained hand in his calloused one. You are extraordinary, and I know I cannot see what you see, Helena, but I would like to spend the rest of my life trying to understand it. If you will let me. She drew in a sharp breath. Coleman, are you saying what I think you are saying? I am saying I love you, he replied simply. I am saying I want to marry you and spend every day learning about the world through your eyes. I am saying that what makes you different is what makes you perfect, at least to me. Helena laughed and cried at the same time, and then she was kissing him, her lips soft and warm and tasting faintly of the mint tea she had been drinking. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, she said, yes, I will marry you, Coleman Vance, but you have to promise me something. Anything. Promise me you will never stop asking me what I see. Promise me you will never stop trying to understand, because that is what makes you different from everyone else. You actually care about my experience of the world. I promise, Coleman said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. They were married 6 weeks later in a small ceremony at the church in Jefferson. Many townspeople stayed away, still uncomfortable with Helena's strangeness and disapproving of Coleman's acceptance of it. But Helena's aunt was there, beaming with pride and relief that her unusual niece had found someone who truly appreciated her. Some of the ranch hands from the Harrison spread came, men who had grown to respect Coleman's skill and character, and the local school teacher, Miss Sarah Whitmore, attended as well. She was one of the few people in town who had never joined in the mockery of Helena. I think what you see is a gift, Miss Whitmore told Helena after the ceremony, and I am glad you found someone who recognizes that. Coleman and Helena moved into a small house on the Harrison property, part of Coleman's compensation for his work. It was a simple structure, just 2 rooms and a loft, but Helena immediately began transforming it. She painted the walls with murals that depicted the world as she experienced it, swirls of color and light that seemed to move and breathe. Coleman would come home from long days working with horses and cattle to find his wife covered in paint, her face glowing with creative passion. "Tell me about your day," she would say, and he would describe the horses he had trained, the fences he had mended, the cattle he had moved from one pasture to another, and Helena would listen with the same intense focus she brought to everything, occasionally interjecting with comments about the colors or sounds or textures his words evoked in her mind. In return, Coleman would ask about her day, about what she had painted or drawn, about what she had seen during her walks around the property, and Helena would describe experiences so rich and layered that Coleman sometimes felt overwhelmed trying to imagine them. But he never stopped trying. Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. Money was tight, as it always was for ranch workers. Some of the other workers' wives refused to socialize with Helena, put off by her strange way of talking and her tendency to stare at things they could not see. And there were still occasional incidents in town when they went for supplies, moments when someone would make a cruel comment or give Helena a look of contempt. But through it all, they had each other. Coleman's steady presence helped ground Helena when the world became too much, when the sensory input overwhelmed her, and she needed quiet and darkness to recover. And Helena's unique perspective helped Coleman see beauty and meaning in things he had previously taken for granted. She taught him to notice the world in all its complexity and wonder. One cool October evening, as they sat by the fire in their small house, Helena suddenly said, "I want to show my work. I want people to see what I see, even if they cannot experience it the way I do." Coleman looked up from the harness he was mending. "That is a wonderful idea. How do you want to do it?" "I thought perhaps we could hold an exhibition," Helena said hesitantly. "Invite people to come see my paintings. Maybe if they could see what I create from my experiences, they would understand better. They might not think I am so strange or frightening. Or they might finally recognize how talented you are," Coleman said warmly. "I think it is a fine idea. We could use the barn at the ranch. Mr. Harrison is a fair-minded man. I bet he would let us use it if we asked." To Coleman's relief and Helena's surprise, Harrison agreed immediately. "I have seen your wife's work," the rancher said. "My daughter mentioned seeing paintings when she delivered some eggs to your house. She said they were like nothing she had ever seen before. I am curious to see them myself." They spent the next month preparing for the exhibition. Helena selected her best paintings and created several new ones specifically for the show. Coleman helped her build simple frames and arrange the barn to display the work to its best advantage. They printed up simple invitations and distributed them around Jefferson, though they had no idea if anyone would actually come. The night of the exhibition arrived, crisp and clear with a sky full of stars. Helena was so nervous she could barely speak, her hands shaking as she straightened paintings that did not need straightening. Coleman held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, which always smelled faintly of linseed oil and turpentine. "Whatever happens tonight, I am proud of you," he said softly. "You are sharing yourself with the world, and that takes incredible courage." People began to arrive just after sunset. To Helena's shock, there were quite a few of them ranch workers and their families, some townspeople who were curious despite their reservations, and even a few travelers who had heard about the unusual exhibition and wanted to see what all the fuss was about. They moved through the barn in small groups, studying the paintings with expressions ranging from confusion to fascination to genuine wonder. Coleman watched Helena carefully, ready to intervene if anyone said something cruel, but to his surprise, most people were respectful, even if they did not fully understand what they were seeing. Then Martha Pendleton arrived, flanked by several other prominent townswomen. Coleman tensed, remembering the scene on the street months earlier. But Mrs. Pendleton simply walked through the exhibition without saying a word, studying each painting with an expression that was impossible to read. Finally, she stopped in front of a large canvas that depicted what Helena called the sound of Sunday morning. It was a complex swirl of golds and blues and soft pinks with shapes that suggested church bells and hymns and the rustle of best dresses. "I do not understand what I am seeing," Mrs. Pendleton said slowly, "but I cannot deny that it makes me feel something. It makes me remember Sunday mornings when I was a girl, the peace and hope of them." Helena stepped forward cautiously. "That is exactly what I was trying to capture, Mrs. Pendleton. The feeling of Sunday morning, the way it sounds and looks and feels all at once." The older woman turned to look at Helena, and for the first time, there was something other than contempt in her expression. "I owe you an apology, Mrs. Vance. I thought you were speaking nonsense, filling people's heads with foolishness. But this," she gestured at the paintings, "this is not nonsense. This is art. This is your truth, and it is beautiful, even if I do not fully comprehend it." Helena's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, Mrs. Pendleton. That means more to me than you know." The exhibition was deemed a success. Several people even purchased paintings, paying prices that seemed absurdly high to Helena and Coleman, but which the buyers insisted were fair for such unique work. More importantly, the evening seemed to shift something in how the town viewed Helena. She was no longer just the strange girl who said incomprehensible things about colors and sounds. She was an artist, someone whose different way of seeing the world produced something of value. As winter approached, Helena discovered she was pregnant. The news filled both of them with joy and a little bit of terror. They were still young and relatively poor, living in a small house on land they did not own, but they were also deeply in love and committed to building a life together. "What if our child sees the world the way I do?" Helena asked one night, her hand resting on her still flat belly. "What if they have to go through everything I went through?" Coleman wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Then we will teach them to be proud of how they experience the world. We will teach them that being different is not the same as being wrong, and we will make sure they always have at least two people who understand and accept them completely." "And if they see the world the way you do?" Helena asked. "Then we will teach them to pay attention, to really notice things, to appreciate the complexity of the world, even if they cannot experience it the way you do," Coleman replied. "Either way, they will be loved and accepted exactly as they are." The winter was harsh that year, with snow that piled up higher than Coleman had ever seen it in Texas. He worked long hours keeping the ranch's livestock safe and fed, often coming home exhausted and half frozen. Helena kept their small house warm and cozy, cooking hearty meals and working on smaller paintings when the light was good enough. One particularly brutal February afternoon, Coleman came home to find Helena sitting at their table crying softly. He immediately went to her, kneeling beside her chair. "What is wrong? Is it the baby?" Helena shook her head. "The baby is fine. It is just that I went into town today for supplies, and I heard Mrs. Patterson talking to her daughter. She was saying that she hoped our child would not inherit my affliction, that it would be cruel to bring another strange one into the world. Coleman felt anger rise in his chest, hot and fierce. Mrs. Patterson is a small minded woman who cannot imagine anything beyond her own limited experience. You are not afflicted, Helena. You are gifted. But what if she is right? Helena looked up at him, her face streaked with tears. What if it is cruel to pass this on to a child? What if they suffer the way I have suffered? Coleman took both of her hands in his. Listen to me. Yes, you have suffered because of how some people react to your differences, but you have also experienced joy and beauty in ways most people never will. You create art that moves people, that helps them feel things they could not otherwise feel. Would you really give that up to be normal? Helena was quiet for a long moment. No, she finally said. No, I would not give it up. But I wish the world was kinder to people who are different. Then we will do our part to make it kinder, Coleman said. We will raise our child to be compassionate and open-minded. We will teach them to appreciate differences in people rather than fearing them, and maybe, just maybe, they will help make the world a little bit better. Their son was born on a warm May evening in 1879, arriving with a healthy set of lungs and a thick shock of dark hair. They named him Thomas, and from the first moment Coleman held him, he was utterly lost in love. Helena recovered from the birth slowly but surely, and together they adjusted to the exhausting, wonderful reality of parenthood. As Thomas grew, it became clear that he experienced the world differently than most people, though not in exactly the same way Helena did. He could see sounds as colors, but he did not hear colors or experience the other sensory overlaps that his mother did. He would sit in his cradle, staring in fascination at things that seemed to be invisible, his tiny hands reaching for colored shapes that only he could see. He is like me, but different, Helena said one afternoon, watching their 6-month-old son track something across the room with his eyes. He has his own way of experiencing the world. Then we will learn what that is, Coleman said, the same way I learned about yours. True to his word, Coleman approached Thomas's development with the same patient curiosity he had brought to understanding Helena. As their son grew old enough to talk, Coleman would ask him questions about what he saw and experienced, never dismissing or discouraging his descriptions, no matter how strange they seemed. The dog's barking is orange, 2-year-old Thomas announced one morning. What kind of orange? Coleman asked seriously. Bright orange, like a sunset, or pale orange, like a peach? Thomas scrunched up his face, thinking hard. Like a pumpkin, he decided. Helena watched these exchanges with a heart so full she thought it might burst. This was what she had always wanted, a family that accepted and celebrated differences rather than punishing them. A place where strangeness was just another form of beauty. As Thomas grew, so did Coleman's reputation as a skilled horseman and ranch manager. When old Mr. Harrison died in 1882, he left Coleman a substantial portion of land in his will, along with a letter expressing his admiration for the younger man's character and work ethic. Suddenly, Coleman and Helena owned property outright, a shocking development that changed everything. They built a larger house, one with a dedicated studio for Helena, where she could paint without worrying about the mess. They also built a small barn and bought their own horses and cattle. Coleman continued to work hard, but now he was building something for his family rather than making someone else rich. Helena's art continued to evolve and gain recognition. A gallery owner from New Orleans visited Jefferson in 1883 and was so impressed by her work that he offered to represent her. Soon, her paintings were being sold to collectors across the South and beyond. She even received a commission to create a series of paintings for a wealthy family in Boston, work that paid enough to significantly improve their financial situation. Through it all, their love deepened and matured. They learned each other's rhythms and needs, how to comfort each other during difficult times and celebrate together during joyful ones. Coleman never stopped asking Helena what she saw and experienced, and Helena never stopped trying to help him understand. It became a form of intimacy between them, this ongoing conversation about perception and experience and the nature of reality itself. One evening in the summer of 1884, when Thomas was 5 years old and running around the property like a wild thing, Helena and Coleman sat together on their porch watching the sunset. They did this often, finding peace in the shared silence and the stunning display of color and light. "Do you remember the day we met?" Helena asked. "When I was standing in the street covered in rotten vegetables." Coleman smiled. "I remember thinking you were the bravest person I had ever seen. You were not cowering or apologizing. You were just standing there, still seeing whatever it was you saw, refusing to let them take that away from you. I remember thinking you were either very kind or very foolish to intervene," Helena said. "I could not figure out why you cared." "I cared because it was wrong," Coleman said simply, "and because I was curious about you. I wanted to know what you saw that made people so uncomfortable. And now that you know, was it worth the curiosity?" Coleman turned to look at her fully. The setting sun painted her in shades of gold and amber, and even without Helena's unique way of seeing, he thought she was the most beautiful thing in the world. "It was worth everything," he said. "Learning to see the world through your eyes, even just a little bit, has been the greatest gift of my life. Well, that and our son." Helena leaned her head on his shoulder. "I never thought I would find someone who accepted me as I am. I thought I would spend my whole life alone or married to someone who merely tolerated my strangeness." "There is nothing strange about you," Coleman said, as he had said 100 times before. "Or if there is, it is a wonderful strangeness, the kind that makes the world more interesting and beautiful." They sat in comfortable silence for a while longer, watching as the sky shifted through 100 shades of color. Inside the house, they could hear Thomas playing, his high, clear voice singing a song he had made up about the shapes he saw when his mother played the piano. "I want another child," Helena said suddenly. "I want Thomas to have a sibling, someone else who understands what it is like to experience the world differently." Coleman was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "I want that too. This house feels like it has room for more love, more noise, more life." Their daughter was born the following spring, a tiny, perfect creature with Helena's hazel eyes and Coleman's strong features. They named her Rose, and she proved to experience the world in yet another unique way. Unlike her mother and brother, Rose did not see sounds or hear colors. Instead, she could feel emotions as physical sensations, happiness as warmth, sadness as a cool weight, anger as a prickling on her skin. "How do we have such unusual children?" Helena wondered aloud one afternoon, watching as 4-year-old Rose tried to explain to her older brother why she could feel his frustration as a scratchy feeling. "Maybe it is not that unusual," Coleman suggested. "Maybe there are more people who experience the world differently than we realize. Maybe they just learn to hide it because they are afraid of being mocked or hurt." Helena considered this. That is a sad thought. All those people hiding their true selves, afraid to share their unique perspectives. "Then maybe our family can help change that," Coleman said. "By being open about how you and the children experience the world, by refusing to hide or apologize, you show other people that it is possible to be different and still be happy and successful." And that became something of a mission for them. Helena began writing articles for newspapers and magazines, describing her experiences and the experiences of her children. She corresponded with doctors and researchers who were beginning to study these unusual sensory phenomena. She even traveled to New York in 1888 to speak at a medical conference, bringing Coleman and the children with her. The trip was transformative. In New York, Helena met other people like herself, people who saw sounds and tasted colors and experienced the world through overlapping senses. For the first time in her life, she was not the only one. There were others, and together they were beginning to understand that their experiences, while rare, were not aberrations, but variations, different notes in the grand symphony of human consciousness. Coleman watched his wife flourish in this environment, surrounded by people who immediately understood what she was talking about without needing lengthy explanations. He felt a moment of worry that she might want to stay in New York, where she could be among people like herself. But when the conference ended, Helena was eager to return to Texas, to their ranch, and their life there. "This was wonderful," she told Coleman on the train ride home. "But Jefferson is our home. Our life is there. I do not need to be surrounded by people like me all the time. I just needed to know that they existed, that I was not alone in the world. And now I know." As the years passed, their ranch continued to prosper. Coleman gained a reputation for breeding excellent horses, animals that were smart and calm and reliable. Helena's art became increasingly sought after, with galleries in multiple cities carrying her work. Thomas grew into a thoughtful young man who used his unique way of experiencing the world to become an exceptional musician, able to see the colors of the sounds he created and adjust them for maximum beauty. Rose developed a gift for understanding people, able to sense their emotions in ways that made her an extraordinarily compassionate and insightful person. In 1892, when Jefferson decided to build a new school, the town council asked Helena to create a series of paintings for the building. It was a remarkable development. The same town that had once pelted her with vegetables now wanted her art to be the first thing children saw when they entered their school. "I want to create something that celebrates differences," Helena told Coleman as she worked on preliminary sketches. "Something that shows children that there are many ways to experience and understand the world and that all of them are valid." The resulting series of paintings was stunning. Each one depicted a different way of perceiving sight, sound, touch, taste, smell, and then the overlapping senses that Helena and others like her experienced. They were beautiful and thought-provoking, and when they were unveiled, even the people who had once dismissed Helena as mad had to admit that she had created something special. Martha Pendleton, now quite elderly, attended the unveiling. Afterward, she sought out Helena and Coleman. "I owe you another apology, Mrs. Vance," she said, her voice wavering with age. "I have been thinking about the day I led that crowd against you, throwing food and calling you terrible names. I was frightened of what I did not understand, and I responded with cruelty. I am ashamed of that now." Helena took the old woman's hands gently. "I appreciate your apology, Mrs. Pendleton, and I forgive you. We are all learning all the time how to be better to each other." As the century drew to a close, Coleman and Helena found themselves entering their 40s with a deep sense of satisfaction. They had built a good life together, raised two remarkable children, and helped their community become more accepting of differences. They had proven that love and patience and genuine curiosity about another person's experience could bridge seemingly impossible gaps in understanding. One evening in the fall of 1898, they took a ride together across their property, just the two of them. Thomas was away at a music conservatory in Boston studying composition. Rose was visiting friends in town. They had the land and the sunset to themselves. "Do you ever regret it?" Helena asked as they dismounted near a creek that ran through their property. "Tying yourself to someone so strange, you could have married a normal woman, someone who did not require so much explanation and defense." Coleman turned to her, his weathered face serious. "Helena Vance, in 20 years of marriage, I have never once regretted choosing you. Loving you has been the easiest thing I have ever done. Understanding you has been challenging sometimes, yes, but it has also been fascinating and rewarding. You have taught me to see the world in ways I never imagined possible. Why would I regret that?" Helena smiled, tears glimmering in her eyes. "I love you, Coleman. I loved you from the moment you asked to see the world through my eyes instead of trying to convince me I was seeing it wrong." "And I love you," Coleman replied, pulling her close. "I loved you from the moment I saw you standing in that street, refusing to let anyone diminish your experience of the world. They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, listening to the creak and watching the light fade from the sky. Helena described the colors she saw, the sounds she heard, the way the world sang and danced around them. And Coleman listened, as he had listened for 20 years, with complete attention and genuine wonder. Their children came home for Christmas that year, bringing news and laughter and the special chaos of a family reunion. Thomas had composed a symphony inspired by the colors he saw in different sounds, and it was being performed by a real orchestra in Boston. Rose had become engaged to a kind young man who worked as a teacher and who seemed completely unfazed by her unusual way of experiencing emotions. He says it is helpful, Rose told her parents, laughing. He says he always knows how I am really feeling, so there is no confusion or misunderstanding. Sounds like you found someone good, Coleman said, thinking of how he and Helena had managed to build a relationship on honesty and openness about their different ways of experiencing the world. The wedding took place the following summer, a joyful celebration that brought together people from all over Texas and beyond. Helena painted a special portrait for her daughter, one that captured not just Rose's physical appearance, but the warmth and compassion that radiated from her. It hung in Rose's new home, a reminder of where she came from and who she was. Thomas returned from Boston a few years later, having achieved considerable success as a composer, but feeling homesick for Texas. He built a house not far from his parents' ranch and continued composing, creating music that was unlike anything else being produced at the time, music that reflected his unique way of experiencing sound as color and color as sound. As Coleman and Helena entered their 50s, they began to slow down a bit. Coleman hired younger men to handle more of the physical ranch work, though he still insisted on training the horses himself. Helena continued to paint, though she worked at a more leisurely pace, taking time to really observe and experience before translating what she saw onto canvas. They had grandchildren now, a whole new generation running around the ranch. Some of them seemed to experience the world differently, in the ways their grandmother and father and aunt did. Others seemed to perceive things more typically. But all of them were raised with the understanding that there were many valid ways to experience reality and that differences should be celebrated rather than feared. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the town of Jefferson threw them a celebration. It was a remarkable event, given how things had started between Helena and the town. But time and familiarity had worked their magic. Helena was no longer a frightening outsider, but a respected member of the community whose art had brought recognition to Jefferson. Coleman was admired as a successful rancher and businessman who had always treated people fairly. At the celebration, the mayor gave a speech about how Helena and Coleman had helped Jefferson grow and change, becoming more accepting and open-minded. They showed us that being different is not something to fear, the mayor said. They showed us that when we take the time to understand each other's perspectives, we all become richer for it. Later that night, back in their home, Coleman and Helena sat together in her studio. It was a beautiful space, filled with her paintings and sketches, smelling of linseed oil and turpentine, and the flowers that always sat on her work table. That was quite a speech, Helena said, leaning against Coleman's shoulder. He meant it, Coleman replied. You really have changed this town, Helena. You helped people see that different does not mean wrong. We changed it, Helena corrected. I could not have done any of this without you. You were the first person who asked to see the world through my eyes instead of demanding I see it through yours. That made all the difference. Coleman kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. I asked because I was curious. I stayed because I fell in love. And I have spent 25 years being grateful that you said yes when I asked you to marry me. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the kind of silence that only comes after years of partnership and deep understanding. Finally, Helena said, Tell me what you see when you look at that painting. She gestured to a large canvas she had been working on, a swirling abstract piece that seemed to pulse with life. Coleman studied it carefully. I see movement, he said slowly. I see energy and joy. I see colors that seem to be dancing with each other. I see something beautiful that I do not fully understand, but that moves me anyway. Helena smiled. That is perfect. That is exactly what I was trying to create. What do you see when you look at it? Coleman asked. I see the sound of our life together, Helena said softly. The rhythm of our days, the harmony we have created, the colors of the emotions we share. I see love, Coleman. That is what I always see when I think about us. The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges, but also deep satisfaction. Coleman's hair turned silver, and his body bore the marks of decades of hard physical work. Helena's hands became gnarled with arthritis, making painting more difficult, though she refused to stop completely. They moved a bit slower, rested a bit more, but their love remained as strong as ever. In 1910, when they were both in their mid-50s, Coleman had a health scare that reminded them both of their mortality. He recovered, but it prompted long conversations about the future, about what they wanted the rest of their lives to look like. I want to travel, Helena said. I want to see more of the world, experience new places, and sounds and colors. Will you come with me? Of course, Coleman said. Where do you want to go? Everywhere, Helena replied with a laugh. But maybe we should start with California. I want to see the ocean. I want to experience the sound and color of waves. They made the trip that summer, traveling by train across the Southwest and into California. For Coleman, who had spent most of his life in Texas, the journey was eye-opening. But it was Helena's reaction to the ocean that he would never forget. She stood on the beach for hours, tears streaming down her face, as she experienced the incredible sensory richness of the sea. It is like a symphony, she told him. The waves create these massive, blue-green sounds that crash and roll, and the smell is silvery white, and the feeling of the sand is like tiny bells ringing against my feet. Coleman, it is the most beautiful thing I have ever experienced. He held her hand and tried to imagine it, this overwhelming flood of sensory input that his wife was experiencing. He could not fully comprehend it, could never fully understand what it was like to be inside her mind. But after more than 30 years together, he had learned to appreciate the mystery of it, the beautiful unknowability of another person's inner life. They returned to Texas, renewed and energized, with Helena immediately beginning a series of paintings inspired by the ocean. These paintings became some of her most celebrated works, exhibited in galleries across the country. She was in her late 50s now, and her art had matured into something profound and moving, accessible enough that people without her unique perception could still find meaning in it, yet rich enough to satisfy those who did share her way of experiencing the world. Their children were settled and happy, building their own lives and families. Thomas's music was being performed internationally. Rose had become a counselor, using her ability to sense emotions to help people work through difficult feelings and situations. They visited often, bringing grandchildren who were growing up in a world that was slowly becoming more accepting of differences. In 1915, when Coleman was 60 and Helena was 58, they decided to write a book together about their life and their experiences. It would be part memoir, part exploration of sensory perception, part love story. They worked on it for 2 years, sitting together at their kitchen table, reminiscing and reflecting on everything they had been through. The book was published in 1917 and became an unexpected success. People were fascinated by Helena's descriptions of her sensory experiences and moved by the story of Coleman's patient efforts to understand her. It became particularly popular among young people who felt different or misunderstood, who found hope in the story of two people who had built a life together despite their vastly different ways of experiencing the world. They received letters from all over the country, from people who saw sounds or tasted colors or experienced other sensory overlaps. Many of these people had spent their whole lives thinking they were alone or broken. Helena and Coleman's book helped them understand that they were part of a larger, if scattered, community of people whose senses worked differently. We are helping people, Helena said one afternoon, reading through a stack of letters. We are making them feel less alone. You are helping people, Coleman corrected gently. You are the one with the unique experience. I am just the person who asked to understand it. No, Helena said firmly. We are helping people together because the message is not just that people like me exist. The message is that understanding and acceptance are possible, that love can bridge the gap between different ways of experiencing the world. That takes two people, Coleman. It takes someone with the unique experience and someone willing to truly listen and try to understand. As they entered their 60s, both Coleman and Helena began to think more about their legacy. They had built a successful ranch, raised good children, created art and music that moved people, and helped their community become more accepting. But they wanted to do one more thing. In 1920, they established a foundation to support people who experienced the world differently. The foundation provided funding for research into sensory phenomena, created scholarships for artists and musicians with unique perceptual abilities, and sponsored educational programs to help teachers and parents understand and support children who saw or heard or felt things differently. This will continue after we are gone, Helena said, watching as the first board meeting of the foundation took place in their home. This will be our lasting contribution. Coleman squeezed her hand. They were getting older, slowing down more and more, but their minds were still sharp and their love was still strong. They had built something that would outlast them, something that would help people for generations to come. The 1920s brought more changes. They celebrated their golden wedding anniversary in 1923, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, by friends old and new, by people whose lives they had touched in ways both large and small. It was a joyful celebration, full of music and laughter, and Helena's art displayed on every wall. 50 years, Coleman said that night, as they sat together in the parlor after everyone had gone home or to bed. 50 years of marriage, and I still love you more than I can say. 50 years, Helena echoed, her voice quavering slightly with age. 50 years of you asking me what I see, of trying to understand my experience of the world. 50 years of being accepted exactly as I am. Coleman, you gave me a gift I can never repay. You gave me a gift too, Coleman said. You showed me that the world is bigger and stranger and more wonderful than I ever imagined. You taught me to really pay attention, to notice things, to appreciate complexity and mystery. You made my life infinitely richer. They sat together in the comfortable silence of long marriage, holding hands, watching the fire burn down in the fireplace. They were old now, their bodies worn by time and work and life. But their love had not dimmed. If anything, it had grown stronger, deepened by decades of shared experience and mutual understanding. Helena passed away peacefully in her sleep in the winter of 1927. She was 70 years old, and she had lived a full, rich life. Coleman found her in the morning, still holding the sketchbook she had been working in the night before. Her last drawing was of the two of them, standing together on their porch, watching a sunset rendered in colors only she could truly see. The grief nearly broke him. For 72 years he had walked the earth, and for 49 of those years, Helena had been by his side. He did not know how to be in the world without her unique perspective and her gentle presence and her constant, unwavering love. But he carried on because that is what she would have wanted. He continued to run the foundation they had established. He spent time with his children and grandchildren, telling them stories about their remarkable grandmother. He looked at her paintings every day, trying to see the world the way she had seen it, trying to hold on to that connection, even though she was gone. One spring evening, about a year after Helena's death, Coleman sat on the porch of their house, watching the sunset. It was a beautiful evening, with the sky painted in shades of orange and purple and gold. He thought about Helena, about how she would have described the colors, the sounds they made, the way they danced and sang in the fading light, and then just for a moment he could almost see it. not with Helena's sensory overlap, not with her unique perception, but with the understanding he had built over 49 years of listening and learning and loving. He could almost see the world the way she had seen it, full of wonder and beauty and connections that most people missed. Thank you, he whispered into the evening air. Thank you for teaching me to see. Coleman lived for another 3 years, passing away peacefully in his sleep in 1930 at the age of 75. He was buried next to Helena in a cemetery on the edge of Jefferson under a sky full of stars. Their gravestone was simple, but next to it stood a small bronze plaque with one of Helena's paintings reproduced on it, the one showing the sound of their life together. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren carried on their legacy. The foundation continued to grow and help people. Helena's art remained in galleries and private collections, continuing to move and inspire people decades after her death. Thomas's music was still performed. Rose's children inherited her gift for sensing emotions and used it to help others. And in Jefferson, Texas, in the school where Helena's painting still hung, children learned about the woman who saw the world differently and the cowboy who had loved her enough to try to see through her eyes. They learned that being different was not wrong, that there were many ways to experience reality, and that love and understanding could bridge any gap. The story of Helena and Coleman became a local legend, then a regional one, then a story that spread far beyond Texas. It became a testament to the power of acceptance, the importance of curiosity, and the transformative nature of love. It showed that when we take the time to truly understand another person's experience, when we ask to see the world through their eyes instead of demanding they see through ours, we open ourselves to beauty and wonder we could never have imagined on our own. And perhaps that was their greatest legacy, not the art or the music or the foundation, important as those were, but the simple, profound example of two people who loved each other enough to bridge the gap between their different ways of experiencing the world. They proved that understanding was possible, that acceptance was powerful, and that love could flourish in the space between two vastly different perspectives. Their story reminded people that we all see the world differently, in ways both large and small. And when we approach those differences with curiosity instead of fear, with patience instead of mockery, with love instead of contempt, we create something beautiful. We create connection. We create understanding. We create the kind of love that lasts not just a lifetime, but generations, rippling out through time and touching lives that Helena and Coleman never even knew existed. In the end, that was what mattered most. Not that Helena saw colors and sounds, or that Coleman tried to understand. Not even that they built a successful ranch, or that Helena became a famous artist. What mattered was that they chose each other every single day across 49 years of marriage. They chose to keep trying to understand, to keep communicating, to keep loving. They chose to see the beauty in their differences rather than being divided by them. And that choice, repeated day after day, year after year, created something extraordinary. It created a love story that would inspire people for generations to come, a reminder that the most profound connections often form between people who seem impossibly different. All it takes is someone brave enough to be different and someone curious enough to ask, "Will you show me how you see the world? Will you teach me to see through your eyes?" When we are willing to ask that question, and when we are willing to truly listen to the answer, that is when real love becomes possible. That is when we transcend our individual limitations and glimpse something larger and more beautiful than either of us could see alone. That is when we create stories worth telling, lives worth living, and love worth celebrating long after we are gone. Helena and Coleman's story was that kind of love. It was built on a foundation of mutual respect, genuine curiosity, and unwavering acceptance. It weathered mockery and hardship and the inevitable challenges of any long marriage. And it emerged stronger for all of it, a testament to what becomes possible when we choose understanding over judgment, patience over frustration, and love over fear. Their legacy lived on in their descendants, in the foundation they established, in the art Helena created, and the music Thomas composed. But most of all, It lived on in the countless people who heard their story and found the courage to be themselves, to share their unique perspectives, to ask others to see the world through different eyes. It lived on in every moment of understanding between people who experience reality differently, in every act of patience and acceptance, in every love story built on genuine curiosity and respect. And so, in a small town in Texas, under the same stars that had witnessed their first meeting and their last goodbyes, the story of Helena and Coleman continued to be told. It was told to children learning about acceptance, to couples learning about love, to anyone who had ever felt different or alone or misunderstood. It was a story about seeing and being seen, about understanding and being understood, about loving and being loved exactly as you are. It was a story that proved love could transcend difference, that curiosity could bridge any gap, and that when we truly take the time to see the world through another person's eyes, we discover beauty we never knew existed. And perhaps that was the truest thing of all, that Helena and Coleman's love had opened eyes, changed hearts, and helped create a world where being different was not just tolerated, but celebrated as the gift it truly was.